So Anya has her hand up, and go ahead, Anya. Please unmute yourself, and then Paulina.
I think, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation. It was wonderful talk and very informative. So I used to love Henry James when I was younger, and I read a bunch of his books. I don't remember them very much anymore. So it was a nice, refreshing course too. However, when you're in your philosophical being a philosophical practitioner, you focus on, which makes a lot of sense, on making a person aware what their problem is through the work of Henry James. And the problem I have seen in those three characters, those three clients, was their being lost, not feeling that they are subject of their own actions. They are not authors of their actions. And that's very important. But then there is a question, you also kind of direct them how to become the authors in different ways, and facing responsibility or facing choices. And also you make them aware to become, but it's very existentialist really approach. We create ourselves, we become autonomous, we choose our actions. It reminds me very much of that. But the question always in the end is the criterion. What do we choose? Sartre would say, well, you create, you choose, you make your own essence, you create yourself. And there is no other way. He also says, hell is other people, just to remind us. So people are not always the best. But we always fall on these very important questions. What is the criterion of action? After we have already helped people to realize they have to become subject of their actions, they are responsible, they are really morally responsible, they are moral subjects, and they are actually authors of their actions. Still, there is a question of the criterion, and that's what always bothers me. Anyway, so that's kind of a comment, question, whatever. I wonder if you have.
Yes. Well, I think that going back to the summum bonum and the highest good in a life, and with myself, I always work that out between the client and myself. So I don't tell them, what they should do, like the best good is for you to go back to your wife. No, we talk about all the features involved as good decision-making process. And that takes time. But that's basically how we decide on what the criterion is. We go through all the possible choices they have and then decide based on their values, which one will give them the best result.
Okay, thank you.
Pragmatic.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Anya. Paulina, and then Raja. Okay, go ahead, Paulina.
Thanks so much for that talk. I really like the definition of morality you gave at the beginning as this kind of lucid and sensitive response to one situation, like a really close attunement to reality. So my question is, I guess to cultivate that kind of attunement, to an extent, you need to be a really careful observer of what's going on around you and take time to reflect on it and think about it and make sense of it. And I think we often have the stereotype of the people who do that, writers and such, who spend so much time in that reflective state that they become detached from the world, as though there's a choice between engaging in things and relationships and in this reflection. So I'm curious how you reconcile that with finding a balance between, encouraging your clients to do things like journaling, say, and reflect more, and then actually, connecting that reflection to practice and bearing out that moral attunement in relationships with others.
Thank you. Well, so I'm referring people to my own articles, but my approach to philosophical counseling with this direction towards the highest good and its phenomenology. That I wrote an article on that, and that would be helpful for the last person. And for you, I wrote an article on returning an essential practice to philosophy, and it's called the sensing exercise, and I teach it routinely to my clients. And it's kind of it's a bit like mindfulness, but the thing that makes it different in my mind is that at the end, and maybe other meditations do this that I don't know about, but at the end, after you're deeply in tune with yourself, then you open your eyes and you listen and you connect with the world around you. So you start to getting an experience of being present to yourself while being fully present to life outside of yourself, so that when you make these choices, they're attuned to the reality that you're in. So there's already, right from the beginning, the idea that the inner and the outer world have to be balanced. And that's how I begin to teach a client how to go about doing that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't really an answer. It's just more about, I think there's always kind of a tension there, and it's balancing the two in some way.
Yeah.
And not, I guess, doing them in sequence, but this exercise that you're discussing is like kind of reconciling the two in the moment.
Yes.
Okay. Thanks, Paulina and Shanti. Raja, please, let's hear from you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for this talk. It was absolutely riveting. It's about 3 o'clock in the night here in India, so it really kept me awake and also inspired me now to read some Henry James. Now, I too was quite interested in the characterization of morality in the beginning, and in particular, the role of imagination. And it seems to me from the 3 cases that you described, that primarily, at least with these 3 clients, the role of perhaps, at first, the role of the imagination was to, find a way for them to identify themselves as someone, to find a self, as someone to be, or understand themselves as someone who is in a situation. So I come from Iris Murdoch, who also, of course, has this emphasis on just attention and clear vision, which also was part of your of that characterization. And for her, it's always looking at the self is often characterized as a danger, as something that the psychoanalysts do, and that sort of where one runs the risk of being stuck with the self, because it's such a, as she says, such a bedazzling object, that if one ever looks there, one might never look anywhere else. So I'm just curious whether in the work that you do, but also in what you see from James, imagination also has this this other-directedness, where becoming attuned to what's actually out there also requires the attempt to realistically imagine what the others are like.
That's a really good, nice point. And I was thinking about that too, imagination. And I've been encouraging my clients, to think imaginatively, creatively about the moral situation that they're in, because I can't be with them every minute. I can't be with them every second going through, okay, how are you going to decide? And sometimes these things happen so fast too. And so I want them to start to feel flexible, that they're in a situation and they can imagine something arising out of themselves that's moral and ethical to do there. And of course, it takes practice, as we've been talking about, but it's reflexive ultimately as they begin to practice it. So that's the second part of the imagination, as I understand it. And Carolina might have more to say about that too, because her hermeneutics is about that whole situation is excellent.
Thank you for that, Raja. What really impresses me also is that you're awake, wide awake at 3 in the morning in India. I mean, philosophy more often has the reputation of putting people to sleep, but obviously this set of presentations has had a much better effect, and that's great to hear. Patricia, please go ahead.
I really enjoyed your presentation, Shanti. But I'm asking what are really not very interesting philosophical things, but I was really focusing on the practical in terms of the fragility of the ego of Anne, how she came to be your client.
Well, through the Psychology Today website.
Ah.
Yeah. And so what it did was it moved my website to the top. So when people are looking for philosophers, counseling, any kind of counseling in Taos, my name, my website comes up first because I'm registered with Psychology Today.
Okay.
So that's how she came to me. And
because I was, it seemed possible that her mother had made some intervention. And I was just wondering about all of that, because she did seem like a very fragile ego.
Yeah, it is definitely fragile. And, I have at times seen her twice a week, just to keep supporting her in the different, what do I want to say? When she makes a choice, she has to carry it through. And sometimes that's often very frightening for people. And so, to give her the backup support that she needs. And I highly recommend people doing that Psychology Today, referral. It's cheap. And actually, it's brought me quite a number of clients and ones that have worked out well. So.
With a cautionary note, if you don't mind, and that is that Psychology Today accepts a variety of different therapies for their listings, and for a number of years they accepted our certificate just based on its number when you're asked to input, something. Now they've changed their standards, Shanti, and the last 2 counseling classes that we certified had trouble getting into their system because they've tightened their bolts a little bit. So we then had to go through back doors, and the applicants had to go through a lengthier review in which it was explained that there were already philosophical counselors up there, yada, yada. So it's become not as easy as it used to be. And I would be surprised if you were not the only philosophical counselor in Taos, so it's not surprising that you would come to the top, whereas in New York City, or in LA, there are quite a few philosophical counselors. But, all these factors play into it, okay? So just so people will understand the context. It's a good thing, but as Rick says, I don't know if he's still here, but, Rick did it. Also when he graduated from our course some years ago. But most people who find you there think you're a psychotherapist because that's the context. And we, at the same time, Shanti, you realize full well that we are distinguishing ourselves from psychotherapists, but we're also working the other side of the street by advertising with a psychotherapy site. So it adds a little muddle to the mix, okay? And maybe some clients would also need a preliminary explanation that you found me on Psychology Today, but I'm not a psychologist, for most of the philosophers in the room, and that clarification is ethically necessary too. So, I mean, by the way, the bibliotherapy that you're doing is outstanding. Aside from the, plus and minus of Psychology Today, this is just outstanding bibliotherapy, and I'm really happy that you unearthed William James. That's really great stuff. So we have Kane. Jorn was first. Jorn, we haven't heard from you today. Welcome. Nice to see you. And please unmute, and then we'll hear from Kane.
Thank you, Shanti, for your great presentation. And I have a quick practical question. most of Henry James' novels are so thick, takes a long time to read them. Have you encountered resistance on the part of your clients to read such big, voluminous works? And what did you do either to convince them to do the reading or found a substitute for it, or let it go, or provide a summary? So what did you do?
Thank you. You know, that I think in general, I refer them to as novellas and as short stories, because after I got all the way through, as I said, I read all of them. I realized that many of the same themes, of course, were repeated. Like I could have named a number of other short stories that dealt with the same theme as The Beast in the Jungle, or I could have named several that dealt with, you know, similar themes of the witchy mother. So I tend to go towards, now that I have read them all, which when I started, I hadn't read them all. So I do have resources to the shorter novellas and things that he wrote that have the similar themes.
Thank you.
Okay, that should hopefully answer your. When you were saying this, Barb, at the beginning, or Shanti, you know, when you said this at the beginning that you'd worked your way through the whole collection, I thought to myself, gee, there's something of a method actor in you. You know, this is like a method therapist. You're going to read absolutely every word he wrote before you recommend any. So that's that's like true grit on your part. I don't know.
It was worth it. You know, he was worth every second, man. I'll tell you, it was really great. Anyone, you should try it yourself. I mean, it's such an enjoyment that it was not painful at all, Lou. It was.
Oh no, I didn't. You know, I'm sure it wasn't. I just have my pile of reading now is already so high for the summer. If I had 110 works by Henry James, it's going to topple over, and I won't read anything. So anyway, thank you. Okay, Kane, please go ahead. Unmute yourself, Kane. We'll hear you better.
Okay, hi. I remember there was a part in your book or on your slides where it said something how most of his books focus on or a demand for a sacrifice that we can all identify with and admire. So I was just wondering, when I saw that, I was thinking, and when he says things like this and talks about concepts such as kindness and love and what men and women want and how they should behave, it seems to me that he kind of, as far as human nature is concerned, he conflates it. He conflates what it means to be moral or immoral with contemporary Western social values and norms. So I don't know if he's either ignoring or he's kind of oblivious to maybe the ways in which, as far as morality goes, ways in which people see reality, and even maybe Western civilizations from different time periods, the way they saw morality, the way they saw love and relationships and roles and whatnot. So, for example, with the Mayans, had they been able to read his books, do you think they would have been able to identify and admire this or that sacrifice?
Well, I understand, the point that you're making. What I found is that one of the themes for him throughout is the change between the old world and the new, and the difficulties that people were having and grappling with that.
Right.
And so, just the dilemma that you're talking about, even if a person didn't agree necessarily with the conclusion that James came to in his story, they would still recognize the grapple and the issues that were involved. So I don't think he's out of date yet, because, he died in 1920.
Right.
So he's just in that transition time, and we're still transitioning. I don't see us still, we still have a lot of the old world ideas that we're dealing with and trying to find what will work for ourselves in this new age. So yeah, I think he's still relevant, definitely.
Oh, I just mean my issue is that it seems like maybe he says he doesn't claim, really what is and what is not moral, but it seems like indirectly that's what he's doing. And that my fear is that could lead people to maybe not being open to, really trying to drill down deep into morality, like casting, sociological ideas aside and our own contemporary social norms and values aside and able to really focus on morality in a more metaphysical kind of way.
Like, what do you mean?
Well, let me think. Which exact parts of the book? What was the man sacrifice? Kindness and love. You know, there talks about what was it again that you said about the concept of kindness, about how important it was, or something?
Yes, I believe that.
Right, but I mean, like, other people or from other time periods may not put as much emphasis on those things, that say they're not necessarily a part of the moral categories. And I just wonder if, I don't know, that was my.
I'm a pragmatist, and I've always found that in the world that I live in, kindness works better than being mean. So, so pragmatically speaking, these virtues that Henry James is espousing, pragmatically speaking, and his brother, right, Henry James, is the pragmatist of, that, yeah, it works, is what we will go back to, like Massimo said. It works because morality and ethics is about, what works in daily life, and what Henry James is talking about, kindness and love works.
Thank you.
Okay, Gary, go ahead, please unmute.
Yeah. I was thinking about the way in which writers, perhaps not now as much as they used to, in writing, sometimes deliberately, even with a very specific political point, thought that what they were writing would be more effective if, in a sense, they tried to make a kind of universal appeal. Now, I think probably we're all a bit skeptical about the idea of a universal appeal, but I think one way of looking at it would be to say that James touches on the mammalian component of people very often. Kindness, for instance, does seem to be grounded. I mean, I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, but it does seem to be grounded in some very fundamental things about being human. And it's certainly not, if it's not universal, it's certainly broadly cross-cultural. I mean, many different traditions, religious traditions, do emphasize that kindness is important. I mean, someone like Nietzsche would differ on that, and you might find some variation in Aristotle, but
yeah, and then in feminist, philosophy, we have the philosophy of caring, which I think is fully supported and thought about, and caring. I mean, wow, it's just a basic virtue in my mind, if not the most important one. So just starts from there, right? I mean, if I don't care about you, it's a bad world. I mean, I say we have to have that virtue. We have to. The world would be, it goes back to Kant, right? Would you want to live in a world where there wasn't kindness or caring? I wouldn't want to be such a person, and I wouldn't want to live in such a world.
Right.
Well, unfortunately, history reveals to us too many periods, many of them short-lived, but absolutely horrific, when psychopathic maniacs take over the powers of the state and wreak havoc on their own populations, let alone their neighbors. And that's so there are just, unfortunately, endless counterexamples. And if you asked the victims of these atrocities what kind of world they would want to live in, every last one of them, Shanti, would agree with you that kindness is infinitely preferable to meanness. So I don't think empirically it's even a question. It's a different question as to how it is that psychopaths end up with the power that they do sometimes. That's probably beyond our province, whether or not some of them, if they had philosophical counseling when they were younger, could they have turned out, to aspire to a higher good? That's a question we'll have to try and answer one day. But listen, thank you so much for this effortful and very thought-provoking piece of work, Shanti. You always come up with something original, and your power of creativity seems to grow over time. So more power to you. And let's give Shanti a well-deserved virtual round of applause, which I'll take a snapshot of. If you could show yourselves and give her a hand, we'll include this. We're going to have one heck of a collage made of all of you doing this, and somehow or other it'll turn into a massive group photo at the end of the day.